Hey guys, when the pandemic started to kick off around February, March, and Japan started to close its borders to people from outside Japan, they brought in a couple of systems. One was Japanese citizens returning to Japan from other countries, obviously would still be allowed back in because they're citizens, and they'd be put into quarantine for a couple of weeks. So they actually used a couple of hotels specifically for it, set them up for quarantining, and people coming back from other countries, coming back to Japan, were put into those hotels for a couple of weeks to quarantine, and then at the end of it, if they were cleared, they'd go home and everything back to normal. So that was all good and all fair, and that's sort of pretty similar to what a lot of other countries have been doing as well. However, there was a very unfortunate group of people, and that was people who have Japanese permanent residency in Japan, but are still citizens of other countries. So that's really common here. We've talked about that on videos years ago. People asked, what are the benefits of citizenship over permanent residency? And a lot of people choose permanent residency. Even though they might live here forever, they'll choose permanent residency because they want to remain citizens of their own country, but they want to live in Japan forever. And there's a lot of people in that situation who have homes here and jobs here, careers here, who've married and have partners and have kids and have lives. Their lives are all 100% in Japan. However, their passport is still from their home country. But their permanent residency status means that they can live in Japan permanently forever, providing they don't break any laws or anything like that. They can live in Japan forever. And it's quite common. So people usually that have been here longer than 5 years, sometimes as little as 3 years, but people lived here longer than 5 years. So we know people who have permanent residency who've been here for 20 years, 30 years, and it's quite a common situation. However, a lot of people who were outside Japan February, March, which isn't uncommon because that's just before the start of the new school season. So people often return to their home countries January, February, March to visit their relatives in the home countries, their friends. And a lot of people got caught. They were in their own country, and suddenly Japan closes its borders, and Japan said, okay, citizens can come back and quarantine for 2 weeks and then go home, but they just lump permanent residents in with all the other foreigners. So if you're a person who had a 12-month visa to come work in Japan for 12 months and then go home, you're considered the same as someone who has a permanent resident. And it's just extremely unfair. There's some really, really sad stories. There's people who'd gone off to another country for other reasons, and then when the borders got closed, they've been cut off, and their homes and their families, their wives or husbands and children and jobs and their whole life is in Japan, and they can't come back to it, and they've been locked out for 6 months. And Japan was talking this week, the government was talking this week of letting those people come back in September, which is just, it's sort of a little bit infuriating, because the way it's being reported is with no compassion at all. It just shows that selfishness that you see in situations like this, that people who are here, who didn't get locked out, just don't seem to care. And we've got these sort of expat media type people on the internet and so on that report on these things with just total lack. And that's what triggered this video. There was this couple of reports this week of the Japanese government's considering letting permanent residents back into Japan from September, and no sort of editorial about about time or anything like that. It just really callous, and it sucks. It really does suck, because permanent residents in Japan pay the same tax as citizens do. We have all the same obligations and responsibilities as citizens do, and yet when it comes to a situation like this, and you can sort of understand in a way, because when you get an unusual situation like this that the Japanese government hasn't had to deal with before, they obviously don't know how to deal with it, and they don't know what to do. And we've seen a lot of that during the last 6 months. You know, things that they just don't know what to do. What shall we do? What shall we do? That whole dolce-o thing, you know. What shall we do? What shall we do? And you can just imagine the old guys sitting around the table there not quite sure what to do. But just the total lack of compassion from everybody. You know, we haven't seen any compassion about this publicly from anybody. You know, the government just haven't cared. No, if they're not Japanese citizens, they have to stay out. But wait a minute, their homes are here and their families here. People who live here for 5, 10, 20 years don't have homes in other countries usually. They don't have lives in other countries. They don't have a way of making an income. You know, you've basically given up everything in your home country to come and live here and put 100% into living here, and then to be locked out and not allowed back in. As a second-class citizen, we've seen this before. We have seen this before, that the non-Japanese people are treated as second-class citizens in situations like this, and no one seems to question it. You know, no one seems to question it. It's quite obvious that, you know, that the newspapers and people like that don't want to make waves, and there's just this massive lack of compassion from anybody. You know, it's terrible. It really is. It really is. I mean, we were exchanging emails with a guy this week who was in Europe when they locked everybody out, and he's a permanent resident, and he has his career is here, and his home is here, and everything's here. Luckily for him, his wife was actually with him. His wife was with him in Europe, and so they've both been locked out. So they've had 6 months with no income and no way to get home, and just locked out. You know, nothing. Suitcase full of stuff, and 6 months locked out of their home, basically. So it's just terrible. It's just terrible. You know, the chances are you guys won't hear about this anywhere. No one seems to be talking about it. And there's a terribly selfish sort of behaviour that we see in situations like this, where I'm okay, so I'm not going to worry about it. You know, it really reminds us, to be honest, it reminds me of the situation with YouTube. You know, the big earners in YouTube who earn all the big money, when there's injustice going on in YouTube, the big earners don't say anything about it because they're earning their big bucks. They don't want to make waves. You know, like we've been told by someone before, don't make waves in YouTube if you want to be successful. You know, you've just got to go along with whatever they say. And it's a bit similar to that. We get the same sort of vibe about this, but, you know, no one wants to upset anybody, so they're just nobody's speaking up about it. Nobody's saying, hey, that's not fair, let them back in. You know, it's not that hard. I mean, we're not talking about that many people. You know, permanent resident status, not visas, not someone that's on a visa. You know, if you come here for 12 months on a visa and you're intending to go back at the end, you know, that's a short-term commitment, and that, you know, so those people get locked out. That's fair enough, and it's not going to change those people's lives. They can wait till this stuff passes and come spend 12 months here another time, right? You know, it's a bit disappointing for them, but they'll get over it. But it's different for a permanent resident. Permanent resident has put everything into living here on the understanding that they're a permanent resident. You know, that's the status. It's not a visa. That's their status. Their status is permanent resident. And we make all our decisions based on that. When you know you're a permanent resident, you know, you don't have that connection to your home country anymore. This is your home country then. And everything goes into here, all your money and your career and your home and your family and the whole thing. You know, the whole thing goes into being here. And then suddenly to have the door closed on you, you know, it's just wrong. It just is really wrong. Shows no compassion at all. And then it seems that no one else, you know, that none of the media people or the commentators or anybody seems to be showing any compassion about it at all. They're just all going, oh well, you know, they're locked out. I'm okay, so I'm not going to worry about those people. You know, it seems to be the vibe that it gives. But anyway, so there it is. You might hear about this. You probably won't. No one seems to care. No one really seems to care. They just sort of, you know, it gets mentioned now and again. It comes up that the government were talking about it, and they're considering. You hear that a lot from the Japanese government. They consider things. they consider things. They have meetings and they consider things. That goes on for months. So they're considering letting them back in September. Which, you know, I mean, it's 6 months without income, 6 months away from your home, 6 months away from your family. It's just terrible, isn't it? I mean, there's enough damage being done to people's lives by this virus anyway, without it being done by bureaucracy. You know, there's no need for that. Let them come back, let them stay in a hotel for 2 weeks with the Japanese citizens that are quarantined. You know, it's the same thing. We're paying the same taxes. We have the same obligations and responsibilities. So, but it's sort of annoying. It's that second-class citizen thing. We've seen that before. We have seen that before. We made a video before about discrimination in Japan. You know, we've seen that before. The discrimination and the second-class citizen style treatment that non-Japanese people sometimes get. You know, and it should be talked about more because, you know, Japanese government's been keen for more foreigners to come live and work here. You know, and if they want to achieve that, they need to be a bit more supportive and a little bit more compassionate and a little bit more decent towards the people that do that. You know, that in return for the loyalty and the efforts put in by people, you know, who live here, to treat us with some sort of reasonable treatment, you know. But anyway, so that's probably the first and last time you'll hear about that topic. Probably nobody sort of seems to be terribly interested in it, but anyway, there it was. More videos coming soon.